Hello, and welcome to Wisdom of Experience. Today we embark on a journey into a space often shrouded in good intentions, yet filled with unspoken heartaches, the nursing home. Imagine standing at that profound crossroads. Perhaps it's for yourself, facing the twilight years, or for a beloved parent or spouse whose needs have outgrown your capacity to meet them at home. The decision to move into, or facilitate a move into, a nursing home is almost always born from a place of perceived necessity, a desire for safety, for care, for support. It's painted as a sanctuary, a final chapter residence where trained hands offer comfort and security. But what if this choice, etched with love and worry, slowly transforms into a source of quiet, gnawing regret? What if the very walls designed to protect begin to feel like they're closing in, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually? I speak to you today not just as a host, but as someone who has navigated this very passage. Someone who has lived within those walls. Moving into a nursing home isn't merely a change of mailing address. It's a seismic upheaval that can fundamentally alter the landscape of a person's soul. It can unravel the intricate threads of identity, independence, and connection that we spend a lifetime weaving. The loss of autonomy, the chilling silence of isolation, the erosion of purpose. This experience is far more complex, far more devastating, than the glossy brochures ever reveal. Through my own lived experiences, reflecting on the powerful, often hidden struggles of well-known figures throughout history, and grounding our understanding in sobering research, we will delve into the deep emotional, physical, and social scars this transition can inflict. Why does a place intended for care so often become a place of profound loss? Whether you are personally contemplating this path, supporting a loved one through it, or simply seeking to understand the realities of aging with greater compassion and empathy, I invite you to stay with me. This exploration might just reshape how you perceive growing older, the value of independence, and the true meaning of care. Let's begin this important conversation, here on Wisdom of Experience. Chapter 1, The Shattering Loss of Independence, When the Foundation Crumbles. Perhaps the first, most visceral shock upon entering a nursing home environment is the sudden, stark erosion of independence. Think about it. Independence isn't some abstract concept. It's the very bedrock of our daily existence, the air we breathe without thinking. It's the simple, profound power to decide. When will I rise from bed this morning? What nourishment will I choose for my body? Will I read quietly, engage in a hobby, or simply sit by the window and watch the world? It's the ability to follow our own rhythms, make our own choices, big and small. For many elderly individuals, myself included, clinging to this autonomy isn't stubbornness. It's clinging to the very essence of selfhood. To have that control systematically dismantled, handed over to schedules and protocols, can feel less like adaptation and more like a slow, internal dying. I remember the jarring transition vividly. At home, my mornings began with the familiar ritual of making coffee just the way I liked it, tending to my small balcony garden, reading the newspaper at my own pace. These weren't grand acts, but they were mine. They structured my day, gave it shape and personal meaning. Suddenly, within the nursing home, breakfast arrived at a set time, chosen from a limited menu. Activities were scheduled, often things I had little interest in. Even the simple act of deciding when to sleep or wake felt dictated by the facility's rhythm, not my own. It wasn't just inconvenient, it felt like my identity, the me defined by these small, self-directed actions, was being erased, replaced by the generic label of resident. This profound loss resonates throughout history, even outside the specific context of a nursing home. Consider Theodor Herzl, the visionary founder of modern political Zionism. In his youth and prime, Herzl was a whirlwind of independent action. A respected writer, a tireless diplomat, traveling across continents, shaping movements, driven by his own fierce convictions. He embodied agency. Yet, as his physical health tragically deteriorated in his later years, he found himself increasingly confined, eventually bedridden, reliant on others for the most basic functions. His world, once spanning nations, shrank to the confines of a room. His powerful mind, which had envisioned a future for a people, was trapped within a body that no longer obeyed his will. While his circumstances differed, the emotional parallel is striking. The chasm between a life defined by self-determination and one defined by dependence is a universal human experience, and in a nursing home, this transition is often abrupt and institutionalized, stripping away layers of self-worth with frightening speed. Or let us reflect on the extraordinary life of Helen Keller. Blind and deaf from infancy, she achieved a level of independence that remains astonishing. She learned to communicate, graduated college, authored books, traveled the globe advocating for disability rights, becoming a symbol of human potential overcoming immense barriers. Her life was a testament to the power of the human spirit to carve out autonomy against all odds. Yet, in her final years, as age and frailty took their inevitable toll, Keller too experienced a growing dependence on caregivers. The woman whose inner strength had propelled her across the world found her physical sphere contracting. Her fierce independence, won through such monumental effort, became increasingly reliant on the assistance of others. While her spirit undoubtedly remained formidable, this later chapter mirrors the experience within nursing homes, where even the most resilient individuals can find their hard-won autonomy gradually slipping through their fingers, replaced by a reliance that feels alien and diminishing. This transition from being the driver of your own life to being a passenger, or sometimes feeling like mere cargo, is profoundly shocking and destabilizing. Many fellow residents I spoke with expressed this not just as sadness, but as a deep, aching grief for the person they used to be, the life they used to command. It wasn't merely about missing old routines. It was about the loss of the self that was intertwined with those routines, with that freedom. It's the foundation of life starting to crumble, leaving one feeling terrifyingly unsteady. This profound unsteadiness, this sense that the very ground beneath one's feet is crumbling, often opens the door to another corrosive feeling, the silent heartache of isolation. Chapter 2, The Silent Heartache of Isolation, Alone in a Crowded Room. There's a cruel paradox often found within the walls of a nursing home. You are surrounded by people, staff bustling, other residents sharing the same space, and yet, an overwhelming, penetrating sense of isolation can become your most constant companion. It's the feeling of being fundamentally alone, unseen, unheard, even forgotten. It's a silence that isn't about the absence of noise, but the absence of meaningful connection. When I first moved in, my family visited often. There were flowers, familiar faces, reassurances. But inevitably, life outside those walls continues its relentless pace. Children have jobs, grandchildren have school and activities, friends have their own lives and limitations. Visits, while still cherished, naturally become less frequent. The initial flurry of attention subsides, and you begin to notice the empty visiting hours, the weekend stretching out in quiet monotony. Special occasions, ironically, can amplify this ache. I vividly recall one Christmas day. The staff were kind, there was a festive meal, but I sat in my room afterwards, watching snowflakes drift past the windowpane, the silence punctuated only by the distant, muffled sounds of other people's celebrations filtering down the hall. The loneliness felt physical, a heavy weight in my chest. Was I truly remembered? Did my absence leave a noticeable gap in the festivities happening elsewhere? It wasn't the first time I'd felt alone, but the contrast between the supposed joy of the season and the profound solitude I felt was almost unbearable. It's a feeling many residents know intimately, the holiday blues hitting with the force of abandonment. This deep sense of isolation, this feeling of being adrift from the currents of human connection, has echoes in the lives of figures who seemingly had the world at their feet. Consider the legendary actress Greta Garbo. Famous for her ethereal beauty and captivating screen presence, she was also known for her intense desire for privacy, famously declaring, "I want to be let alone." In her later years, after retiring from the dazzling spotlight of Hollywood, she became a near recluse, rarely seen, retreating into a self-imposed solitude in her New York apartment. Despite her fame and fortune, which could have commanded constant companionship or care, she chose withdrawal. While her isolation was, on the surface, a choice, it highlights a profound truth. Emotional distance can grow regardless of physical proximity or available resources. In nursing homes, however, this isolation is rarely a choice. It's often a consequence of declining family visits, difficulty forming deep connections with transient staff or other residents who may be struggling with their own cognitive or physical decline, and the sheer logistical barriers to maintaining old friendships. The result is similar to Garbo's later life, a growing detachment from the world, but one that feels imposed, leading to feelings not of chosen solitude, but of painful abandonment. The impact of this is not merely emotional. It's a serious health concern. Groundbreaking research, such as a 2020 study by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, brought this silent epidemic to light. Their findings were stark. Over 40% of nursing home residents reported experiencing chronic loneliness. This isn't just fleeting sadness. Chronic loneliness is a significant risk factor linked to higher rates of depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, and even increased risk of premature mortality. It's as detrimental to health as smoking or obesity. We try to bridge the gap with technology, video calls, emails. But for many elderly residents, the technological barrier is insurmountable. I remember my neighbor down the hall, a lovely woman whose face would light up when her grandchildren's photos were shown, but who simply could not grasp the mechanics of a smartphone. For her, that potential lifeline remained tragically out of reach. Greta Garbo's retreat, while perhaps driven by her unique personality and experiences, serves as a poignant, if indirect, cautionary tale. It demonstrates how isolation, whether chosen or imposed, can slowly, insidiously erode mental well-being, creating a chasm between the individual and the world. For countless residents in nursing homes, this chasm yawns wide, not by choice, but through the circumstances of their environment, amplifying the feeling of being left behind, forgotten by the very world they helped build. The heartache is silent, but profoundly deep. When connection fades and isolation deepens, the very meaning of one's existence can come into question. This leads us directly to the next critical challenge. Chapter 3, The Erosion of Purpose, When Life Feels Empty and Meaningless. What gives life purpose? It's a profound question, but often the answer lies in the seemingly most ordinary things. Having some meaning for our existence, a reason to wake up each morning, a feeling that our actions, however small, carry value. Before the nursing home became my reality, and perhaps that of many of us, our days were often filled with purpose, even if we didn't always recognize it. It might be the joy of tending a small garden, watching plants sprout and flourish under our care. It's the pride of preparing a delicious meal for the family, maintaining a clean, welcoming home. It's the sense of belonging from participating in community activities, even just a neighborhood meeting or contributing modest efforts at the local pagoda or church during festivals. These activities aren't just ways to pass the time. They are the threads connecting us to life, reinforcing our identity, affirming our competence and self-worth. Upon entering the nursing home environment, these familiar sources nurturing purpose often dry up abruptly. This setting, however well-intentioned, primarily focuses on basic physical care and safety, frequently lacking meaningful opportunities tailored to the unique histories, abilities, and interests of each individual. Suddenly, there's no garden patch to cultivate, no home to manage according to one's own standards, no community roles to fulfill as before. Even the opportunity to share valuable life experience, so esteemed in our culture, becomes difficult when there's no receptive audience or suitable space. The structure of the day often becomes passive, filled with generalized activities that sometimes fail to spark any real interest. When the institutional environment fails to provide avenues for fulfilling these respected roles, perhaps lacking spaces for sharing stories, teaching skills, or participating in familiar traditions, the erosion of purpose can feel like a cultural disconnection as well as a deep personal void. I remember the numbing sense of loss when the routines that gave my life meaning vanished. I used to love going to the market myself, choosing each vegetable, each fish, then meticulously cooking the family's favorite dishes. I used to spend hours reorganizing my bookshelves, rereading old passages. I used to participate in the neighborhood poetry club, where I could share clumsy verses that nonetheless held my deepest thoughts. All those things, however small, made me feel alive, contributing, being myself. But in the nursing home, meals were served at set times, from a limited menu. Recreational activities were often generic. The days began to drift by in a frightening monotony, blurring together, each indistinguishable from the last. The feeling of being redundant, an invisible burden, started to creep into my mind. It wasn't laziness, but a kind of spiritual paralysis born from the severe lack of meaningful stimuli. Life began to feel alarmingly empty. This struggle to maintain purpose in the later years isn't unique to those in nursing homes. It has touched even the most exceptional figures, those who reached the pinnacles of power and influence. Consider Sir Winston Churchill, a towering figure of the 20th century. He led Britain through its darkest hour in World War II. His powerful oratory and iron will shaping history. His life was defined by immense purpose on a global scale. Yet, after leaving the political arena, particularly in his final years, Churchill battled recurring periods of deep depression, which he famously called his black dog. According to biographers, much of his frustration stemmed from a profound sense of purposelessness. Having wielded such enormous influence, having been so central to world events, he struggled to find meaning in a quieter, less demanding existence. How could he engage meaningfully with the world after having commanded it? In nursing homes, residents face a parallel crisis, albeit on a different scale. It's not just about needing something to do to fill the hours. It's about the fundamental human need to feel that you matter, that your existence has significance beyond merely being cared for. Without that intrinsic sense of value, life's vibrant colors can fade to gray. We can also see echoes of this in the later life of the great novelist Charles Dickens. His life was one of incredible creative energy and output, producing a vast body of work that chronicled and critiqued Victorian society. He was deeply engaged with the world through his writing, public readings, and social advocacy. Yet, towards the end of his life, while working on his final novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, his legendary energy began to wane. He died leaving the novel unfinished, perhaps a poignant symbol of a mind and spirit struggling to maintain its previous level of vigorous engagement. While physical health played a role, some interpretations suggest a deeper weariness, a grappling with the dimming of that intense creative fire that had defined his purpose for so long. It serves as a reminder that our greatest fear in aging might not solely be physical decline, but the potential erosion of the very passions and activities that once made us feel most alive, most ourselves. This resonates particularly with residents who were formerly skilled artisans, professionals, dedicated homemakers, now lacking outlets for their skills or passions. However, purpose can be redefined if the environment allows for it. Take the inspiring example of Henri Matisse, the renowned French artist. In his final years, severely debilitated by illness, confined to bed or a wheelchair, he could no longer paint or sculpt as he once had. Did he succumb to meaninglessness? No. He invented a new medium. With vibrant sheets of paper and a pair of scissors, he began creating his famous cutouts, large, bold compositions full of life and color. He called it painting with scissors. Bedridden, frail, he still found a way to express his artistic vision, to continue creating, to maintain his sense of purpose until the very end. Matisse's story is a powerful testament to the adaptability of the human spirit. But it also underscores a critical point. He had the resources, the support, and crucially, the internal drive and opportunity to redefine his purpose. In many nursing home settings, unless there are dedicated programs like art therapy, occupational therapy, or initiatives that genuinely seek to understand and cater to individual residents' past interests and remaining capabilities, the chance to find or adapt purpose is tragically limited. The potential for continued meaning often remains locked away, contributing to that pervasive sense of emptiness. The care system, sometimes overly focused on efficiency and routine, can inadvertently hinder rather than enable this reinvention of meaning, something that perhaps clashes with the cultural respect afforded to elders' wisdom here. The truth is, the very structure of institutional life itself can sometimes be the factor that erodes purpose. Activities are often standardized to suit the majority, lacking roles that offer a genuine sense of contribution. And the focus on care efficiency can sometimes overshadow the need for autonomy and self-expression. This care model needs re-examination. Is it unintentionally devaluing the potential and remaining capabilities of its residents? This loss of purpose leaves devastating consequences, an encroaching emptiness, the monotonous blur of days, and the gradual erosion of personal identity. Purpose, whether grand or humble, remains an essential nutrient for the human soul at every age. Without it, not only the spirit, but the body too, may begin to decline. Indeed, this weakening of the spirit, this loss of purpose, is often mirrored by a concerning physical reality frequently observed within these walls. Chapter 4, The Physical Decline, a Faster, Steeper Descent. We see fellow residents, once active, become increasingly reliant on wheelchairs, their vitality seemingly fading before our very eyes. How does this happen in a place supposedly dedicated to health and well-being? The reasons are often multifaceted, insidious, and deeply embedded in the structure of institutional living. Firstly, opportunities for spontaneous, natural movement are drastically reduced. At home, you walk to the kitchen, potter in the garden, climb stairs, retrieve the mail. Small exertions that collectively maintain muscle tone and cardiovascular health. In a nursing home, meals are brought to you or served in a communal dining room requiring only a short, assisted walk. Corridors might be long, but there's often little incentive or appealing destination to encourage independent exploration. Organized exercise classes, while beneficial, might not suit everyone's ability or interest, and they often can't replace the consistent, varied movement of independent living. Secondly, while diets are usually nutritionally balanced, they can lack the variety, personal choice, and sheer pleasure of home cooking, sometimes leading to reduced appetite or reliance on softer, less challenging foods, which can indirectly affect overall vitality. Thirdly, the social disengagement we've discussed can have physical repercussions. Loneliness and depression are known to impact physical health, reducing motivation to move or engage. It creates a vicious cycle. Reduced mobility leads to less engagement, which leads to further muscle atrophy and weakness, increasing the risk of falls, which in turn leads to more fear, more restriction, and deeper dependence. The body, deprived of its usual stimuli and challenges, begins to decline at an accelerated rate. This stark reality of physical diminishment in later life, even after a life of incredible strength and resilience, is powerfully illustrated in the story of Harriet Tubman. Known as Moses to her people, she was a figure of extraordinary physical courage and endurance. Escaping slavery herself, she repeatedly risked her life venturing back into the Confederate South to lead hundreds of enslaved people to freedom via the Underground Railroad. Her life was one of constant movement, danger, and immense physical hardship. Navigating treacherous terrain, often traveling by night, carrying the weight of responsibility for so many lives. She later served as a scout, spy, and nurse during the Civil War, demonstrating remarkable fortitude. Yet, despite this lifetime of almost superhuman effort, Tubman spent her final years in a home for aged African Americans that she herself had helped establish in Auburn, New York. Afflicted by seizures stemming from a childhood head injury inflicted by a slave owner, and weakened by the sheer wear and tear of her incredibly demanding life, she became physically frail and dependent on care. Her body, which had been an instrument of liberation for so many, eventually succumbed to the vulnerabilities of aging. Tubman's story is a profound reminder that even the strongest among us face physical decline. But it also implicitly underscores the need for that decline to be managed with the utmost dignity and respect. A respect she fought for tirelessly throughout her life, and which is sadly often compromised in the rushed, impersonal environments of understaffed care facilities today. The way we care for the physically declining body speaks volumes about our societal values. Modern research quantifies this decline with alarming precision. A study published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, JAGS, found that, on average, nursing home residents lose muscle mass, sarcopenia, at about twice the rate of similarly aged individuals living independently in the community. This isn't just about cosmetic appearance. Muscle mass is crucial for mobility, balance, preventing falls, metabolic health, and overall resilience. Losing it rapidly significantly increases frailty and dependence. I saw this statistic made real countless times. Friends who entered the facility needing only a guiding hand soon struggled to rise from a chair. The transition from a walker to needing 2 staff members and eventually a hoist for transfers felt like watching their physical world shrink in fast motion. Their strength, their physical agency, just seemed to evaporate, leaving them feeling trapped within their own increasingly unresponsive bodies. This physical descent is not just a medical issue. It's a profound loss of freedom, a tethering to dependence that can be deeply demoralizing. This growing physical dependence forces residents into situations where another fundamental aspect of selfhood is often compromised. Chapter 5, Dignity Lost, When Privacy Becomes an Unaffordable Luxury. Alongside the loss of independence and the acceleration of physical decline, there is another, perhaps more insidious erosion that occurs within the walls of many nursing homes. The loss of personal dignity, particularly through the stripping away of privacy. Throughout our lives, we cherish our privacy. It's fundamental to our sense of self, our autonomy, our basic human dignity. The ability to manage our most personal, intimate bodily functions, bathing, dressing, using the toilet, in private is something most of us take utterly for granted. It's deeply ingrained in our sense of decorum and self-respect. To suddenly find these intensely personal activities transformed into public, or at least semi-public, events requiring the assistance of staff, often strangers, can be profoundly demeaning. I remember the deep discomfort, the feeling of exposure, the quiet humiliation of needing help with tasks I had managed myself for decades. Having someone else bathe you, dress you, attend to your toileting needs, however kind and professional they may be, fundamentally alters your relationship with your own body. It can feel infantilizing, reducing you from a capable adult to someone who is passively acted upon. There's a vulnerability in that dependence that chips away at your core sense of self-worth. The closed bathroom door, the ability to dress without observation. These small symbols of personal space become luxuries you no longer possess. This struggle to maintain dignity in the face of physical vulnerability and dependence resonates powerfully with the life and philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi. While his fight was primarily for the political independence and dignity of India, his personal life was also a testament to living with profound dignity, even amidst hardship and societal constraints. He chose a life of simplicity, spinning his own cloth, tending to his own basic needs whenever possible, even during his imprisonments. His health deteriorated significantly in his later years, facing the inevitable physical frailties of aging. Yet, he steadfastly maintained his principles and his personal dignity, refusing to be defined solely by his physical limitations. His approach highlights a crucial distinction. Gandhi chose simplicity and self-reliance as expressions of dignity, whereas in many institutional care settings, the loss of privacy and the reliance on others for intimate tasks feel imposed, often stripping dignity away rather than upholding it. The rushed nature of care in understaffed facilities, the quick, impersonal bath, the dressing done with maximum efficiency rather than sensitivity, stands in stark contrast to the reverence for individual autonomy and self-respect that Gandhi embodied. His life serves as a profound, enduring lesson about the intrinsic worth of every individual. A lesson that must be remembered, especially when caring for the most vulnerable. The systemic issues contributing to this loss of dignity are starkly documented. A 2019 Human Rights Watch report, for example, investigated conditions in various nursing homes and highlighted how chronic understaffing directly leads to compromised care, including severe breaches of privacy. Imagine a caregiver, responsible for too many residents, needing to bathe someone quickly to move on to the next person. Perhaps the privacy curtain isn't fully drawn, or the door is left ajar. Perhaps the process is rushed, impersonal, treating the resident more like an object to be cleaned than a person deserving of respect. As the report noted, this often isn't born of malice on the part of individual caregivers, who are frequently overworked and underpaid. It's a consequence of a system stretched too thin, prioritizing basic task completion over the nuanced, respectful care that preserves dignity. But for the resident experiencing it, the result is the same. A feeling of exposure, of being devalued, of their personal boundaries being disregarded. Dignity isn't an optional extra in care. It's central to humane treatment. Yet, in these small, daily interactions, it so often slips away, unnoticed by the system, but felt deeply by the individual. Each instance is another small cut, cumulatively eroding the sense of self. Compounded by these daily erosions of independence, purpose, physical ability, and dignity, the initial hope of just trying it out often confronts a harsh reality. Chapter 6: The difficulty of leaving. Once you're there, it's hard to escape. There's a pervasive, often unspoken assumption when someone moves into a nursing home. If it doesn't work out, if I don't like it, I can always leave. I harbored that naive thought myself initially. It felt like a safety net, a reassurance that this major life change wasn't necessarily permanent. But the reality, for myself and for so many others I encountered, is starkly different. Leaving a nursing home, once you are fully integrated into its system, can become incredibly, sometimes insurmountably, difficult. It's less like checking out of a hotel and more like trying to escape an invisible cage woven from practical, physical, and financial threats. The practical barriers mount quickly. Often, the decision to move into a nursing home coincides with selling the family home to finance the care. Personal belongings are downsized, dispersed among family members, put into storage, or simply given away. There is no home to easily return to. Finding a new place to live, renting an apartment, perhaps, requires significant effort and resources, often difficult to muster from within the confines of care. Then there are the physical realities we've already touched upon. The very environment that was supposed to provide supportive care can, as we've seen, accelerate physical decline. By the time a resident might desperately wish to leave, their health may have deteriorated to the point where independent or even assisted living outside the facility is no longer a viable option. You become physically dependent on the level of care provided, caught in a catch-22 where the desire to leave is strongest precisely when the ability to do so has diminished. I remember the dawning, chilling realization. The decision, made months or years earlier, had set me on a path from which there seemed no easy return. The point of no return had been passed, silently, without my full awareness at the time. This sense of irreversible change, the difficulty of reintegrating into the world after a period of profound separation, finds a powerful, albeit different, echo in the experience of Nelson Mandela. After spending 27 years in prison for his fight against apartheid, his release was a global celebration. But Mandela himself spoke about the challenges of readjustment. It wasn't just about walking free. It was about re-entering a world that had dramatically changed, reconnecting with a family that had grown and evolved without him, and navigating life in a body that bore the marks of long confinement. His struggle highlights a universal truth about institutionalization. Prolonged separation makes reintegration complex. Leaving a nursing home isn't just about finding new accommodation. It's about re-establishing routines, rebuilding social networks that may have frayed, adapting to a world that feels faster and perhaps more intimidating than before, all while managing the health conditions that led you there in the first place. The life you left behind may no longer fit, and forging a new one requires immense resilience and support. And then there is the stark, brutal reality of the financial trap. Leaving a nursing home and re-establishing independent living, especially if requiring some level of in-home care, is incredibly expensive. The average annual cost to restart, covering rent or mortgage, utilities, food, transportation, plus the significant expense of hiring home health aides or nursing support, can easily exceed $50,000 per year in many places, and often much more. For most people, the substantial monthly fees of the nursing home itself have steadily depleted their life savings. The financial resources needed to escape simply aren't there anymore. You become financially tethered to the system, unable to afford the independence you crave. Beyond the practical and financial, psychological factors also play a role. Learned helplessness can set in. Residents become accustomed to having decisions made for them, to having care provided, and the prospect of managing everything themselves again can feel overwhelming, even frightening. A sense of institutional dependency can take root, making the known, however flawed, seem safer than the unknown outside. The door might technically be open, but crossing the threshold feels impossible. Trapped by these practical, physical, financial, and psychological barriers, residents face yet another form of separation. Chapter 7: The Fading Window to the World, Connection Severed. Life outside the nursing home walls surges onward. News cycles churn, cultural trends shift, local communities evolve, families celebrate milestones, and navigate everyday dramas. But for those living within the institution, the connection to this vibrant, dynamic world often becomes tenuous, like a radio signal fading into static. The window to the world, once wide open, slowly seems to shrink and cloud over. Daily routines inside are structured, predictable, often insular. While staff might bring in newspapers or turn on the television news, passively receiving information is vastly different from actively participating in the ebb and flow of life outside. The ability to spontaneously engage. To pop out to a familiar cafe, visit a library, attend a local meeting, even just run a simple errand, disappears. These small connections, these anchors to the wider community, are severed. I remember this feeling acutely. Conversations with visitors, while welcome, often highlighted just how much I was missing. They'd discuss current events, new movies or books, neighborhood happenings, political debates, and I'd feel like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. A profound sense of detachment, even irrelevance, began to creep in. It wasn't just missing out on information. It felt like the world was subtly forgetting I existed, and my own sense of belonging to that world was fraying. I was present, breathing, yet increasingly felt like a ghost at the feast of life. This sense of detachment from the bustling world, this inward turning as external connections diminish, resonates in some ways with the later life of the celebrated American poet, Emily Dickinson. While her isolation in her Amherst home was largely self-imposed, a conscious choice to withdraw and cultivate her rich internal world, the result shares a parallel with the experience of many nursing home residents. In her later years, her contact with the outside world became increasingly limited. Her poetry from this period often reflects an intense focus on nature observed from her window, on introspection, mortality, and the landscapes of the soul. The external world, while still observed, became secondary to her internal reality. For nursing home residents, this detachment is rarely a choice. It's a consequence of physical limitations, cognitive decline for some, and the sheer lack of opportunity and stimulation within the institutional environment. Unlike Dickinson, most don't have the same internal resources or creative outlets to transmute that isolation into profound art. Instead, it often manifests as apathy, disorientation, and a deepening sense of being left behind. The window doesn't just fade, for some, it feels like it closes entirely. There are efforts, glimmers of hope, aimed at reopening that window, even artificially. Some innovative nursing homes are experimenting with virtual reality, VR, technology. Residents can put on a headset and suddenly find themselves visiting the streets of Paris, exploring the Great Barrier Reef. Or even returning to wander through a virtual reconstruction of their childhood neighborhood. These experiences can provide valuable mental stimulation, trigger cherished memories, and offer a temporary escape from the monotony of the four walls. While it's not a substitute for real-world connection and engagement, it represents an acknowledgement of the problem and a creative attempt to mitigate the profound sense of disconnection. But it also begs the question: what other, perhaps simpler, more human-centric ways can we keep that window open? More robust intergenerational programs? Partnerships with local schools or community groups. Easier, supported access to technology for communication and news. Ensuring residents remain connected to the pulse of life outside is crucial for their cognitive health and overall well-being. While the focus has been on the residents' experience of these accumulating losses, the impact doesn't stop at the nursing home door. It creates ripples that affect those on the outside as well. Chapter 8, The Unseen Scars on Loved Ones, a Ripple Effect of Grief and Guilt. Our journey today has focused primarily on the experience of the resident, the person living within the nursing home walls. But the story is incomplete without acknowledging the profound, often silent, impact this transition has on their loved ones, the spouses, children, siblings, and friends who make the agonizing decision, facilitate the move, and then navigate the complex emotional aftermath. Their scars, though perhaps less visible, are just as real. The process often begins with immense emotional turmoil. The decision to place a loved one in care is rarely made lightly. It's usually reached after exhausting all other options, often accompanied by overwhelming feelings of guilt, inadequacy, and failure. Did I do enough? Could I have managed longer? Am I abandoning them? These questions haunt families, even when the move is objectively necessary for safety and specialized care. There's a grief involved, too, grieving the loss of the relationship as it once was, grieving the future they might have envisioned together at home. Once the move is made, the emotional burden shifts but doesn't disappear. Visits become fraught with complex feelings. There's the love and desire to connect, mingled with the pain of witnessing physical or cognitive decline firsthand. There's the worry about the quality of care when they aren't there. Are they lonely? Are they being treated kindly? Are their needs being met promptly? Families often find themselves thrust into the role of advocate, needing to monitor care, communicate concerns to staff, and fight for their loved one's best interests within a system that can sometimes feel opaque or unresponsive. This requires immense emotional labor, time, and energy, often layered on top of existing work and family responsibilities. The story of Florence Nightingale, the icon of modern nursing, ironically casts light on this dynamic from the other side. While she dedicated her life to revolutionizing care for others, her own later years, marked by illness and infirmity, placed a significant burden on her family, particularly her sister, Parthenope. Parthenope devoted a vast portion of her life to managing Florence's affairs and providing support, often sacrificing her own pursuits and well-being in the process. While Florence wasn't in a nursing home, this illustrates the immense personal cost and emotional weight that caring for an aging, infirm loved one entails, even when resources are available. In the context of nursing homes today, families still carry this weight. They worry, they advocate, they provide the crucial emotional link to the resident's past, identity, and sense of being loved for who they are beyond their diagnosis or dependence. Their well-being is inextricably tied to the residents, and the stresses within the care facility ripple outwards, impacting the entire family unit. Consider also the family dynamic touched upon by John Lennon's early life. After his mother Julia's tragic death, his Aunt Mimi stepped in to raise him. While not a nursing home scenario, it speaks to the way family structures shift under the weight of caregiving responsibilities and loss, leaving lasting imprints on relationships and individual lives. Families navigating the nursing home experience today often carry similar unspoken burdens. Complex webs of love, duty, grief, frustration, and the helplessness of watching someone they cherish fade or struggle in an environment they cannot fully control. This silent heartache of the family. The constant low-level anxiety, the guilt that lingers, the exhausting vigilance, the grief that resurfaces with each visit, is a critical, yet often overlooked, dimension of the nursing home reality. They too are deeply affected by the system's shortcomings and the inherent challenges of institutional care. Understanding these interwoven struggles, those of the resident and their loved ones, brings us to the heart of our conversation today. Conclusion: a call to reflect, connect, and act. So, we have journeyed together through some difficult, often hidden truths today, here on Wisdom of Experience. We've explored the complex reality behind the well-intentioned, often necessary, decision to move into a nursing home. We've seen how this path, chosen out of love or necessity, can paradoxically lead to profound losses. The erosion of independence, the sting of isolation, the fading of purpose, the acceleration of physical decline, the stripping away of dignity, the difficulty of leaving, the severed connection to the world, and the unseen scars left on devoted families. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, perhaps even disheartened, by these realities. But acknowledging them is not about assigning blame, it's about fostering understanding and empathy. As our bodies and minds naturally change with age, the desire to maintain our core identity, our agency, our sense of worth, remains fiercely strong. The stories we've touched upon, from leaders like Herzl and Churchill, artists like Matisse and Dickens, activists like Tubman and Gandhi, icons like Keller and Garbo, and figures like Mandela and Nightingale, even glimpsing family dynamics through Lenin. They all remind us that aging, vulnerability, and the need for dignity are universal human experiences. No amount of fame, fortune, or past accomplishment provides immunity. But acknowledging the problems is only the first step. This exploration, drawn from my own time within those walls and the broader human story, is intended as more than just a lament. It's a wake-up call. It's a call to reflect, deeply, on how we, as individuals and as a society, approach aging and care. We can do better. We must do better. How? It starts with awareness and conversation. It involves demanding more from our institutions. Pushing for nursing home models that prioritize resident autonomy, meaningful engagement, and dignified, person-centered care, with adequate staffing to make it possible. It means diligently exploring and supporting alternatives whenever feasible, robust in-home care services, accessible community programs, innovative co-housing models, technologies that support aging in place. And on a personal level, it means committing to connection. If you have a loved one in a care facility, visit. Call. Listen, truly listen, to their experiences, their fears, their joys, however small. Advocate for them. Help them maintain connections to the outside world. Remind them, through your presence and attention, that they are still seen, valued, and loved. Even small gestures of connection can pierce through the isolation. So, I ask you, the wisdom of experience community. Reflect on what we've discussed. Talk about these issues with your family, friends, and neighbors. If this video resonated with you, please share it. Let's broaden this crucial conversation. And share your own experiences, insights, or questions in the comments below. What are your hopes for aging with dignity? What positive examples have you seen? How can we collectively foster a culture of greater compassion and respect for our elders? Let's commit, together, to building a world where growing older doesn't mean fading into the background, but continuing to live with purpose, connection, and unwavering respect until the very end. Thank you for joining me today on Wisdom of Experience. Let's keep this conversation going.